The helicopter vanished into the gray sky like it had never existed. For a long moment she stood there listening, waiting for the thrum of rotors to return, for a shouted correction, for someone to realize a mistake had been made. But the forest answered her instead. Wind brushed through tall pines. Somewhere far off, a bird cried. That was all. Captain Alyssa Reed, United States Army, adjusted the weight of the worn rucksack on her shoulders and slowly exhaled. Years of military training had taught her one rule above all others: panic wastes oxygen. She forced her heart rate down, grounding herself in the moment. This was not a combat zone. This was worse. Dense wilderness stretched in every direction, towering trees, jagged rock faces, uneven ground slick with moss and damp soil. The coordinates she'd been given were wrong. The extraction had failed. Communications were gone. No GPS, no radio, no modern tools beyond what she carried on her body, and what she carried was very little: a small axe with a wooden handle, a coil of rope, a canvas roll containing a flint, a handmade knife, and basic cordage. No firearms, no electronics. This wasn't a mission kit. It was a test kit, one meant for controlled environments. But nothing about this place was controlled. Alyssa scanned the terrain the way she had scanned hostile villages overseas, methodically, instinctively. She noted the slope of the land, the direction of the wind, the position of the sun dipping toward evening. Night would come quickly in the forest, and with it, cold. She moved. Each step was deliberate. She followed higher ground, avoiding valleys where cold air and predators settled. Her boots sank into damp earth, already beginning to chill her feet. She ignored it. Discomfort was familiar. Fear was optional. As she walked, memories pressed in faces from her unit, the laughter that filled barracks late at night, the quiet understanding between soldiers who had bled together. She had survived firefights, ambushes, and deserts that tried to kill her with heat alone. She would not let a forest win. By late afternoon she found it, a massive rock outcrop rising like a natural wall from the earth. Stone offered protection, windbreak, thermal mass, concealment. She circled it carefully, checking for animal signs: loose stone, unstable ground. Nothing fresh, no tracks, no scat. Good, she muttered. She dropped her pack and rested her hands on her knees, finally allowing herself to feel the ache in her shoulders and back. Her breath fogged faintly in the cooling air. The sun painted the rock face gold, then orange, then red. This place could keep her alive. Alyssa tested the rock with her knuckles. Solid. A shallow recess near the base hinted that water had once run here, carving just enough space for shelter. It wasn't a cave, but it didn't need to be. She wasn't planning luxury. She was planning survival. She removed her jacket and tied her hair back, movements efficient and economical. The axe felt familiar in her grip. She selected fallen branches first. Dead wood, dry enough to burn, light enough to move. Every choice mattered. Waste was the enemy. As she worked, she listened. The forest spoke constantly, branches creaking, leaves rustling, distant animal movement. She catalogued the sounds without reacting to them. Training had sharpened her instincts into something almost animal itself. This wasn't about strength. It was about control. By the time the sun kissed the horizon, she had stacked enough wood for a small fire and marked the ground where she would build. Her hands were already raw. A thin line of blood traced one knuckle. She wiped it on her pants without slowing. She struck the flint once, twice. The spark caught, licking at dry bark before blooming into flame. Firelight danced across the stone, throwing shadows that made the rock seem alive. Alyssa stared into it, letting its warmth seep into her bones. For the first time since the helicopter disappeared, she allowed herself a small smile. They had taken her out of the system. They had stripped away technology, comfort, certainty, but they had not taken her skills. They had not taken her discipline, and they had not taken her will. Tomorrow she would build. Tonight she would survive. Wrapped in firelight and silence, Captain Alyssa Reed leaned against the rock face, eyes sharp even as her body rested. The wilderness had made its move. Now it was her turn. Dawn arrived without ceremony. Alyssa Reed woke before the sun cleared the treetops, her body conditioned to rise at the slightest change in temperature and sound. The fire from the night before had collapsed into a bed of glowing embers, still warm enough to coax back to life. She fed it thin splinters of dry wood and watched the flame return, steady and obedient. The first night was always the test. Her muscles ached from the cold ground and yesterday's labor, but nothing felt injured that mattered. Injury was the real enemy now, more dangerous than hunger, more unforgiving than weather. She stretched slowly, rotating shoulders, flexing fingers stiff from gripping the axe for hours. The cuts on her knuckles had dried into dark lines. She studied the land again, this time with morning light revealing details she'd missed. The rock face curved inward slightly, forming a natural spine. Moss clung to shaded stone, holding moisture. Fallen logs lay scattered downhill, likely pushed there by storms years ago. Resources. Alyssa knelt and pressed her palm into the soil. Damp, but not swampy, clay, rich, good for sealing gaps later. Her mind shifted fully into construction mode. No rank, no titles, just problems and solutions. She started with timber. Using the axe, she tested several trees before choosing one already half dead. Taking a live tree cost more energy and time than she could afford. She chopped methodically, angling her cuts to guide the fall. Each swing was controlled, economical. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the morning chill. When the trunk finally cracked and tipped, she stepped back calmly as it hit the ground with a dull, final thud. She didn't celebrate. She dragged. Log by log, she hauled timber toward the rock face, using leverage instead of brute force, wedging stones under one end, pivoting, rolling. Her breathing stayed even. Every motion was a lesson she'd learned long before. Work smarter, not harder. By mid-morning, her hands burned. Blisters began forming beneath calloused skin, but she ignored them. Pain was information, not instruction. She tore thin strips of cloth from the inside of her pack and wrapped her palms, crude but effective. The shelter frame came next. She selected straight branches, trimming them with her handmade knife. No nails, no screws, just rope, pressure, and knowledge. She lashed joints tightly, testing each one with her weight before moving on. If it couldn't hold her now, it wouldn't hold wind later. As the structure took shape, something shifted inside her. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was ownership. The forest stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like a challenge, one she could meet on her terms. She paused only once, kneeling by a small stream she'd found nearby. The water ran clear over smooth stones. She filtered it through cloth and drank slowly, methodically. No rushing, no greed. By afternoon, clouds rolled in, muting the sunlight. A low wind swept through the trees, whispering of weather to come. Alyssa accelerated her pace, prioritizing stability over size. A small shelter finished was better than a large shelter unfinished. She positioned the frame against the rock, anchoring it where stone met earth. The rock would block wind from one side and reflect heat from the fire. It was basic thermodynamics, something she'd once learned in a classroom, now applied with dirt under her nails. Mud came next. She mixed soil with water and crushed leaves, kneading it until it reached the right consistency. Sticky enough to seal, dry enough to hold. She packed it between logs, pressing it in with bare hands, smoothing cracks, reinforcing weak points. Her arms trembled from fatigue. She welcomed it. Fatigue meant progress. By the time rain began tapping lightly against the canopy above, she had a partial wall and a defined space. Small, rough, but unmistakably hers. She stepped back and assessed it like a commanding officer reviewing a position. It would hold, not perfectly, not comfortably, but it would hold. As dusk settled in, Alyssa rebuilt the fire closer to the structure, positioning stones to contain it. Smoke drifted upward, carrying the scent of damp earth and burning wood. She leaned back against the rock, muscles humming with exhaustion. She had built something from nothing, with no machines, no modern tools, no help. The wilderness hadn't broken her, it had revealed her. Tomorrow, she would strengthen the walls, reinforce the roof, improve drainage. This was only the beginning. As night closed in, Alyssa stared into the fire, her reflection flickering in the flames, dirty, tired, but unbowed. They had taken her out of civilization, but they had placed her exactly where she belonged. Morning light crept slowly across the forest floor, filtering through pine needles and mist, turning the air silver. Alyssa Reed opened her eyes before the sun fully rose, alert and focused, her body still humming from the labor of the previous day. The half-built shelter stood beside her like a promise, unfinished, imperfect, but real. She sat up and listened, no sudden movement, no animal calls close enough to matter. The rain from the night before had passed, leaving the ground damp and the forest breathing. She fed the fire with care, coaxing it back to life, then stood and stretched, feeling every muscle protest before falling back into line. Today wasn't about survival alone. Today was about making this place livable. She walked the perimeter of the shelter, evaluating it in full daylight. The walls leaned slightly inward, which was good. It added strength. The mud seals had cracked in a few places overnight, showing her exactly where reinforcement was needed. The rock face behind the structure radiated a faint, retained warmth from the fire. Information, always information. Alyssa gathered flat stones from the stream bed, choosing ones with weight and smooth edges. Each stone had a purpose. She stacked them at the base of the walls, wedging them tight to prevent erosion and strengthen the foundation. Her movements were patient, deliberate. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes in the wild carried consequences. As the sun climbed higher, she turned her attention to the roof. A roof was life. Without it, rain would rot the structure, cold would seep in, sleep would disappear. She selected longer branches, testing them for flexibility and strength, then lashed them across the top of the frame, creating a slanted pitch that angled away from the rock. Water would run off instead of pooling. Each knot was checked. Twice, she layered smaller branches over the supports, weaving them together like ribs. The work demanded concentration. One misjudged step could collapse hours of effort. Her hands moved almost automatically, guided by training that went deeper than thought. As she worked, her mind drifted, not to fear but to purpose. She remembered instructors drilling the same lesson over and over: adapt, overcome, improvise. It had sounded like a slogan back then. Out here, it was a law. By midday, the forest grew quiet. Even the birds seemed to pause, watching. Alyssa wiped sweat from her brow, smearing dirt across her cheek, and continued layering debris over the roof: leaves, pine needles, moss, and finally another coat of mud. The structure darkened as it took on weight, but it didn't sag, it held. She let herself breathe. Inside the shelter, she cleared the ground, leveling it with a flat stone. She arranged smaller rocks into a crude hearth near the entrance, ensuring smoke would vent outward instead of choking the space. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. Safe was everything. She stepped back to view the shelter as a whole. From a distance, it blended into the rock and forest, almost invisible. That wasn't an accident. Concealment came as naturally to her as breathing. If something, or someone, passed through this area, they wouldn't see a shelter. They would see stone. As afternoon light softened, Elisa collected more clay, rich soil, and reinforced every seam. Her hands were swollen now, fingers stiff, but she worked through it, humming quietly under her breath. A habit from deployments, something to anchor the mind when the body was pushed to its limits. When she finally stopped, the sun was sliding behind the treetops. She built the fire again, positioning it perfectly so warmth bounced off the rock face and into the shelter's entrance. The temperature inside rose noticeably. For the first time since she'd been left here, she felt something close to comfort. She sat at the threshold, watching smoke drift upward, the forest bathed in amber light. This was no longer just a shelter, it was a statement. She had taken raw wilderness and shaped it with her hands, her mind, and her discipline. No machines, no technology, just knowledge passed down through generations. Some learned in classrooms, some earned in the field. As darkness settled in, she moved inside, testing the space. She could lie down fully, sit upright, store supplies along the wall. Every inch mattered, and she had claimed it. The wind picked up briefly, brushing against the structure. The shelter didn't move. Elisa allowed herself a rare moment of pride. Tomorrow, she would improve drainage, add insulation, prepare for colder nights. The work would never truly end, but that was fine. Because now, she wasn't just surviving the wilderness, she was living in it.